Today I would like to talk about how to make text boxes look good. So we've been working with individual letters, words, small collections of words, but not just boxes of just body type. And this is less fancy, it's less eye-catching than headline type and less catchy than logos and things like that. But honestly, good body type, well set body type, can make or break a project. So we do need to be cautious about what we're doing with it and making sure that we're making all of this body copy as easy as possible to read. So I've made a new file here, text boxes. I'm going to go ahead and throw up my my guides at all my half-inch marks. Now, I'm going to go online and I'm going to grab just this text box here. We can use any type we want for this. For real projects, of course, you're going to use your real text. There's also Lorem Ipsum, which allows you to use a non-English language bit of text that has about the same word length and word length probability as English does, if you just need to fill a space when you don't have your actual project text. But what I would be very careful about is if I'm doing a project, don't just use some other English text because it might flavor the project you're doing, right? If I was doing an advertisement for makeup, I would not pull this type about the Atari 2600, and I would also be very, very careful to not use a competitor's text, right? So if you're doing it for makeup company A, do not use makeup company B's text for your project or you're going to have a bad time. Now if I just paste this in here, it gives me this line. I don't want that. So I'm going to do, get my text box, drag a box, Command V, paste that in there. Now you can see that it's giving me a box. It looks like any of the rectangles, but it has all these little lines underneath the text. That's showing us that these are text. If I double click in there, it gives me my editor as if it was any other text editor. So I can, use this box just as if it was any other shape. Now if I do this, look, if I have one line that goes outside, I get this red plus. So if you ever see a red plus on one of your projects, it means you have too much type in that box and you need to make the box bigger or have a second box that you can link out. You can do that simply by clicking on that. You get this little extra paragraph symbol and it will make you another paragraph, another text box that's the same shape as the one you just made. So that is very nice. Command Z twice to get out of that. But I just want this so we can work on this. One absolutely vital thing that gets missed a lot in typography is how wide a text box is kind of allowed to be. There's no hard and fast rule, but this is the generalist rule that I use, and I've found it to serve me very well. And that is that no text box can exceed 30 times the type height. So 30 times the type height is the widest my text box should be. Right, you can always break these rules if you want to, but that's just the one that served me very well in the past. Here we have 12-point type. 12-point type. If I multiply that by 30, I get 360 points. Now, we have 72 points per inch. Right? These are all obscure, weird French measurements. Sorry, they're not even numbers. So 360 points divided by 72 points per inch gives us 5? No, that's not right. Yeah, 5. So that gives us 5 inches. So we know that this 12-point text box should not be any wider than 5 inches across. Let me zoom in a little. And let's just go ahead and make our math easy. Let's go to 1 inch here. Let's go to 6 inches here. So that means that between this guide and this guide is 5 inches. Let's move our text box over to there and make it 5 inches. Now, you'll notice that that doesn't look really, really wide. Doesn't. But I promise that this will give you one of the best legibilities is to hit right around 30 times your type height. I will generally actually go thinner than this, but this is good. if you go wider, like let's just say we're going to go to the width of our page, or to our margins. Now when I look at this, this is not great to read, right? Think of, like, go to is a home, and then you have to go all the way back over here to video game console. You get to here, and you have to go all the way back over here. Pick up any book around you and look at it, and none of those books will have text that's this wide unless it's a paragraph or less. You will always have type that is thinner than this, and generally it does line up with that 30 times rule. So this is 30 times. If I was to change this to 10 points, say, right, just a smaller type size, then I'm going to have a different line width, right? It's not going to be 5 inches anymore. It's going to be 10 times 30 is 300 points, divided by 72 is 4 and something around a quarter, 4 and a little less than a quarter. So 4 and a little less than a quarter, because remember we started at 1 over here on the left, so I'm going to be 5 and a quarter is there, and a little bit less than a quarter. Let's just go to an eighth to be safe. Put that there. So for a 10-point box of type, this looks about right. Right? When I'm reading this, I don't have to go too far back. And also, I don't have to keep changing lines too often. How thin a type box can be is a little bit more varied because it depends, honestly, on how long some of your words are. Okay. This, terrible to read. 2 words, 1 word, 2 words, 2 words, 1 word, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 3, 1, 1. That's awful. We don't want to do that. But think of like a newspaper. It's actually pretty narrow. Right? We might be at about that. Now that's not great, but that's what? That's 5 words, 4 words, 4, 5, 4, well, 3.5, and then 4.5. But this is actually somewhat legible. So there's no hard and fast rule for how small it is, you'll just kind of know it. The reason I give you the hard rule for the outside is for some reason people are just not aware when text boxes are too wide to become illegible. And I think this is because that when we are younger and we are taught to do projects with with Word, with Microsoft Office, we just use the whole width of the page and then set the type as small as we can get it to fit our space. We should not do that. If we have type that needs to fill a space, let's say that I do need to use this entire space across here, right? I need to go from this outside guide to this outside guide, and I need type to fill that space. The correct answer is not this. It is not that. That's awful. Reading back and then bouncing down here, terrible. So what I want to do instead is I'm going to give myself, and of course there's automatic ways to do this, but it's nice to do it by hand sometimes. I'm going to give myself a gutter. So I gave myself a middle ruler on 4 1/4, which is halfway across my page. And then I'm giving myself an 1/8 of an inch on either side of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my type box to here. And then I can say, all right, is this type box an acceptable width? Well, I can say I'm at 10 points, which gives me that about 4.2 inches. And then I can go 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 3 and a little less than a quarter. So that will give me, that lets me know that this is probably an okay box because I'm less than that 30 times height. So, but I needed to fill this whole space. Of course, most of the time I have more type than this, but let's just do this. I'm going to bring my text box down so it pops me this nice little linked text box option. And I'm just going to pop this in the corner here. Conjoin these boxes. So now when I read through this, I read this comfortably, and then I switch to the next column. So this is one of the reasons we use columns, is to fill a space horizontally without having to read these horrible, horrible long lines. We can read normally while still using an entire standard size page. This also allows you to do columns in grid design. So if you have a grid that has 7 columns across, well, you can fill each one of those columns with text, or you can go across 2 of those columns and build a text box there. So it does allow you to have a little bit of control of the situation while having text that's easy to read. Again, just please, please, please don't do this. It does not look good. One thing you can actually do is if you go to like Wikipedia, I'm running at a relatively small resolution right now, but you can actually make, sorry guys, I've gotten unused to running on a Mac. See how it actually auto sizes the text? If you read on Wikipedia and you don't like what it looks like, right, like that's wider than it should be. When I read on Wikipedia, I will actually push the page size down to get this to read correctly to me. Like that reads correctly to me. So you can actually use the auto page sizing thing that websites do in order to be able to read them more easily, because they do get too wide. Wikipedia just eats the entire page. And see, when we go down here, this section here, so much harder to read than these nice little concise paragraphs up here. And so we can use the auto page size function to create more readable Wikipedia. So that's just something for other times. Not important for design, important for day-to-day life. So, text box here, we've got a good one. And now I want to talk about what it looks like inside of a text box. We're using Myriad Pro right now. Let me flop that for something more common. Let's get Helvetica up in here. Regular Helvetica. Okay. So we're using a regular Helvetica. There's nothing special about what's going on in here. We're slightly smaller than our standard space. I'm going to go to View, Guides. I'm going to unlock my guides so I can get rid of this one that's in the way. And I'm going to immediately remember to relock my guides. It's also Option, Command, comma, I think. I don't remember. It's on there. It's listed on there. This text box looks pretty good to me. We can again change our tracking, our leading, and our kerning all in these boxes over here. If we change our type size, then we need to recalculate our allowable width for this. So just be cautious as you're doing it. The most common sizes you'll use are 8, 10, and 12 point type, or something in the middle like 9 or 11. For 8 point type, you want about 3 1/3 inches across or smaller. For 10 point type, you want about that 4.2, and then for 12 point type, you want about a 5-inch column. So, and you can just go grab a book off your shelf and you can measure the text columns, and you'll find that these numbers are about what most things are going to use. So be cautious about that width. Thinner columns are generally going to read better. So again, for 8 point type, you're at about 3 1/3. For 10 point type, you're about 4.2. For 12 point type, you're at about 5, and then anything in the middle is going to be in the middle of those three. Sorry. Now what I want to talk about is kind of what this box looks like. Does this box look the way we want it to? And the first thing I'm going to do is what we are looking at right now is exactly the way we are used to type looking, right? All the type lines up over here. We have the correct amount of width, right? We haven't messed with anything over here at all. All of this stuff lines up here. We have all of this raggediness on this side. We also have one hyphenated word, which we'll talk about later. And our last line cuts way over to this side. So when I select this, you'll see that there's a little paragraph option here, and there's 3 common ones, which is justify, or align left, sorry, it's not justify. It's align left, which gives you a ragged right. It's align center, which gives you ragged on both sides. This one is kind of what you see when people like want something to look like poetry, or they use it for like wedding invitations and stuff like that. That's essentially all it should be used for. Please don't use this most of the time. It's very hard to read, and it looks just a little bit too organic for most graphic design, so just kind of be cautious with where you use that. This is a line right, so this lines up, if you look, all of this right side here, and lets all of this be ragged. One issue with things aligning on the right is you have an issue that punctuation now indents your line. See this? Punctuation pulls the visual edge of your line in. If you blur your eyes, there's a little bit of a divot here, and there's definitely a divot here. So we want to avoid that. There are ways to hang punctuation. I don't remember, I think the newer versions of Illustrator do that, and I know that all of InDesign does it, where you can hang your punctuation outside of the box. So what happens is it brings this character all the way to this edge and pops the period out, and same thing here, it takes the L of the control, puts it out to the box, and takes the dash and sets it out here. And that keeps the visual edge of the box correct. So just be aware that if you're using an align right or a full justify, which we'll talk about in a minute, then the hanging punctuation is an option if it bothers you. Now, these are the 3 common ones. There are more. This is probably the next most common one. Justify with last line aligned left. This is what almost everything is going to use. Because, and I'm sorry, this is what everything's going to use where the visual rectangle kind of sharpness of the box matters. If you're just doing a book, you use this. You use left aligned because it's easiest to read, right? You read here, you know exactly where you're starting. You read here, you know exactly where you're starting. So your eyes can bang back and forth very easily. It also has consistent spacing between the letters and between the words. To do justified, watch what happens. It kicks out the spacing between the words. This is a little bit harder for our eyes to read because the rhythm is broken, right? We've broken the rhythm of reading. So be aware that when you do this, it becomes slightly harder to read long sections of type. But for small things, it's not that big of a deal. And I would say oftentimes the design advantage of using justified type outweighs the small loss in readability. And for me to say that means it's probably true, because I'm always pro readability. There are a few other options. You can see this one, and these little pictures do exactly what it says, right? Justify with last line aligned center. I don't know when you'd use that. It's weird. Yeah, we don't do that. And justify with last line aligned right also kind of doesn't make sense. It makes it hard to read, and it looks almost like a signature or like one of those quote things. And then justify all lines, which is of course very silly because it just blasts out that last word. So this is left justified. It's very nice. This is left aligned. This is what you're going to use unless you have good reason to use something else, right? Always use a standard unless you have good reason to use something else. This is the other one that I would also say is standard enough that you don't really have to justify your decision. You don't have to justify your justification. But any of these, you better know exactly why you're using them if you're going to poke those buttons. So do be a little bit cautious with those things. Here is our hyphenate option. You can turn hyphenation on and off. And in settings, you can change how many, I think it's minimum and maximum on how many letters can be on each side of the hyphen and all that business. So you can just turn that off entirely if you want. This is a personal choice. I'm not a big fan of hyphenation. It does make some lines look weird, but I'm going to show you how to fix that in a little while. So hyphenation is an option, but if you're doing a small amount of text where you have the time to hand set everything, I would turn it off and hand set your type. This is regular, we don't need to worry about that. We can turn hyphenation off. See what happens when we turn hyphenation off? We kind of get this negative space. If you blur your eyes, this is weird looking right here. So just be aware that that hyphenation is nice, but can be a problem, especially if you have lots of hyphenations. If you have a paragraph and only have one hyphen, that's really not that big of a deal, but it does impact readability. One thing you can see in type is if you have rivers, we really don't have too much in the way of rivers in this type. You'll see it every once in a while where all of the spaces line up. We kind of have one here, where these spaces are lined up, and if you blur your eyes, you can see this as a conjoined negative space that kind of creates a shape. These two kind of do the same thing because of the weight of the S and the 6 with these two pieces of punctuation gives this kind of a lot of white space right here. But for the most part, this is actually pretty free of rivers, which is nice. So if you ever hear somebody say there's rivers in your type, that's what they're talking about. These things are lining up, and it's just not delightful to look at. Let us switch this to this. So we have, let's see if we have any rivers now. You can see that there's a little bit more. We definitely have a 4-line one here, and it kind of continues up, but it's really just this shape right here. I'm seeing one maybe right here, but that's relatively light. This is an odd shape here. Here we have one, but it's relatively light. So just kind of be on the lookout. It doesn't bother most people, but some people it bothers. It also depends on the weight of your type. Heavier type with more spacing, of course these are going to be more obvious. This is a relatively light font. Helvetica is relatively thin, and it's not going to punch up the contrast between the positive and negative shapes. So don't worry about it too much, but if you blur your eyes and you kind of see like these really nasty shapes down the middle of your text, please try to shift some things around to fix that. Now, that's a thing. You can't just change words most of the time as a graphic designer. Generally, you are given text, and you must set that text exactly as it is, right? You can't just change words in this. You can't just say, oh, well, we don't need the word home, right? I need to save some space, so I'm going to delete that word. You can't do that. Let's undo that. You can't do that stuff, so be cautious with that. You can't generally change type. If it's given to you in a certain way, you've got to use it exactly as it is. So we can do some tricksiness. Let's say we're just doing that basic paragraph that we had right here. We had this one hyphenation that we didn't like, so I'm going to turn hyphenation off, and now I have this negative space I don't like. Well, I don't like that either. Well, let's see what we can do. So how do we bring this word up here without getting rid of stuff? Without getting rid of stuff. Well, the way that I do it, it may not always be, kosher, but it works most of the time, is I will grab the word that I'm trying to bring up and the entire line in front of it, and then what you can do is go over to tracking and just poke the down button a few times. And then look, by bringing the tracking of that line in, I can bring that word up without it really looking too strange. At -18, this is pretty tight. If you blur your eyes, you can't quite see it, but it's a little bit denser than the rest of the type. So it's something to be aware of. That's a little close for my taste. Now we have an orphan. If this one word by itself is called an orphan. If we have one line that ends up at the top of the next column, that's called a widow. We're not really going to set enough type in this class for that, hopefully for that to happen. But realize that this last word by itself is called an orphan, and we don't want those. We do not want orphans. Again, I cannot edit the type that I'm given as a designer, so I'm going to leave this 5 here, because getting rid of that 5 would definitely help. But to get rid of this orphan, we're going to do the same thing we did to fix this controllers issue. And the way we're going to do that is just grab all the stuff that we need, and we're going to pop this in. Now you can see how far I have to go to do this. That's not awesome. -36, if I blur my eyes, or even if I look at this, I can see that this is getting really tight, and I don't like that. So maybe, let's see, this is a small word. Let's see if we can, you know, bring this up. Okay, so we're only at -10 to get that done, and that gets us a whole word up. Now let's see what this one... So that only takes us to -19 to get that and up there. And now we can grab all of this. Oh, can actually make it bigger. And look at that. We're only at -3. So now we only really have one line that's kind of aggressively tracked. This -10 is almost nothing. We only have one line that's aggressively tracked, and we've gotten rid of our orphan. So this is a much better set paragraph than it was before we started with it. Now we can look that even though we have some negative space, like right here, the word released is kind of long and it would be hard to bring up. And one thing when you're doing this within a block of type, especially within a paragraph of type, you need to start at the top and work your way down. Because if I did this here, right, if I grabbed this and pulled this released up to this next line, it's going to mess with where all the rest of the words in this paragraph are lined up. So we need to start at the top and work our way down. Do not ever start at the bottom and work your way back up. You will be redoing these things over and over and over again, and it's terrible. So do not do that. I'm going to go get another paragraph of type, and I'm going to do this again. I'm going to use a slightly smaller column, and one thing I'm going to do as well is we're going to switch our paragraph style thing to justify with last line aligned left. So here's our justification. The first thing I'm going to look for is, we can see that because it was the setting I had last time, this is at -3, so I'm going to just go ahead and make that 0. And I'm going to look and just kind of see, does this bring me joy? I'm going to get rid of this ruler that's in the way, the guide that's in the way because it bothers me. Again, lock guides right here. Oh, it's semicolon, sorry, for lock guide. Delete, so I can hit Command Option semicolon. Will lock my guides. So now I'm looking at this. I'm going to blur my eyes and look for those rivers. I have a little bit right here. And do I have any extra white space? So I do. I have some extra, everything looks good up here. I have some white space here that I'm not a huge fan of. I'm going to have a problem because application is a long word, and getting considered up to the next line isn't really likely going to happen. So let's just see what happens. Let's see how much I need to do to get this. Oh, -25. So I need a -24 to get that there. Now, I can see that that's a little crushed. That is a little bit crushed, but it does take care of the white space issue right there. Oh, so if I do this, here, actually, you know what? Let's leave one of these text boxes over to the side where we can just look at it. Do we like the one on the left or the one on the right more? We can look at each individual line. Do we like this line more or do we like this line more? And I would say I actually do like it being a little compressed, even though it's a little dark. Now we can look and say, alright, we're not getting any rivers still. I don't see any. I'm getting a little extra white space here. And this isn't bad. Look, we only have to pull the word sold up into this. Let's see what we can do. There we go. -9. Yep, -9. That's not bad. And then we have a little bit of white space here, but I think that's actually okay. The white space here isn't bothering me quite as much. And here's something interesting. Look, we have West Germany down here as not an orphan. Although, okay, here's just a point of contention. Generally, an orphan is one word. I would say that a name, like a proper name like this, could also be considered an orphan. And I would generally not leave a proper name like this down by itself, even if it's two separated words. I would put it up into the paragraph. So we've done that here. We pulled this back so this can come up a line by pulling two more lines together. And that gives us, one, we've eaten an entire line. We've saved an entire line here. And two, we've solved our orphan issue. So this is one of those things that hopefully we're actually killing a lot of birds with one stone. We're not just doing this for any one purpose, but we're doing it to make it very, very consistent and nice. Now, somebody could come back and say, oh, well, I want my Atari name to be really, really big at the beginning, right? I want this to be, let's go with like 24. Yeah, I want that to be like 24, and then I want to, have it super bold because that's the way the Atari logo looks. I want it to look like that. Okay, well now all of your type has been pushed. So then we just need to look through this. We can actually see that, nope, the lines that we had to mess with are actually okay. So we're okay, but just be aware that people will ask you to do changes that will screw up all of your text. So these are important things to do. Only do them when it really, really matters, because obviously it takes a lot of time to do them. And also be aware that when somebody changes your stuff, you can't be married to it. You can't be married to the changes you made. Sometimes you just got to make all new changes. And then, in my opinion, if I was redoing this, like if this had kicked everything across, I would not go in and manually reset this. I would reset the entire paragraph box and then start fresh. Don't edit your edits. Go back to standard and then edit from there. You'll be much happier. You'll have much more consistent type, and you'll make far fewer mistakes. Yeah, that is a nice, clean, pleasing to look at box of text with very little. I mean, it's some work, but it's not as, it's not crazy. This is how to set a box of type. Trying to think if there's any other examples I would like to go through, but I think we've essentially covered it. The thing with orphans having the one word down here is our widow. So if I say, hey, you have a widow, or somebody says, hey, you have a widow in your text, what they mean is that you have, your text is coming down, and you have one word that's been kicked off to the next page or the next column. Or, I'm sorry, one line that's been kicked off to the next page or next column. If somebody says, hey, you have an orphan, it is that single word at the bottom, or in my opinion, some proper name should be considered one word and brought up as well. Quick addendum, I realized that I missed a total option on how to work on these things. Let me grab a new paragraph. Actually, I'll just use this one. This one will be just fine. So I missed an option. So we had this spacing here, and to fix that I said let's just pull this up. Well, we actually have another option that I totally just spaced on, and that is to increase the space between the letters to reduce what the computer thinks it needs to put right here. And to do that, all we have to do is go to our tracking, and instead of pulling tracking out, we can add tracking in. And now you can see that it's not really doing a whole lot very quickly, but I'm just going to rapid click this thing. And so we can bring our spacing down to what looks more okay to us by just doing that. Now, but what? So this is an option, but look at that. When you blur your eyes, or even when you look at it, you can tell that that is more separated than the rest of this. Is it going to bother most people? Probably not. Is it an option if for some reason you cannot bring up that next bit? Right? Like to maybe if let's say I cannot get this sucked up into the next line. That's okay. Let's just do it the opposite way. We can take all of this and we can, let's go to a positive 50. That is a little aggressive. Let's see if positive 25 will do it. Even that, even just bringing in down to here, that's less visually obnoxious at 25 than at 50, and it gets what we need done by bringing an extra word down to the next line. So this is an option of using the positive tracking to push content, as well as using negative tracking to pull it up to the next line. Again, I would still start at the top and work your way down, but this is just another option on how to set and make type look really nice and really legible. That's a quick setting of a box. If you guys have any questions, please let me know, and I'd be happy to do more examples. The big takeaways from this are: look closely at your text boxes for legibility, look closely at your text boxes for weird visual phenomena that are happening, like rivers. And text boxes are, again, right around, preferably no more, than 30 times the type height. Thinner is fine, but don't go wider than about 30 times the type height. And again, for 8-point type, that's about a 3 1/3 inch column. For 10-point type, that's about a 4.2 inch column. And for 12-point type, that's a 5-inch column. So be cautious with what you do. That means that when you do your standard Microsoft Office Word document with your 3/4 inch side margins that look like that, well, let's see, what is the measure from here to here? We can do it experimentally. Oh, well, let's use the software we're in. So if that's our box, we can do this very simply. That means that we have a 7-inch column. That is 2 inches wider than our 12-point type should give us. So really, if I'm setting an 8.5 by 11 with standard 12-point type or smaller, I want to split that into this 2-column setup that I have right here. I want to split this into 1 column here and 1 column here, because reading across this is actually going to be more tiring than reading a 2-column setup. And you can just set 2 columns in whatever editor you're using. So the next time you set either a Word document or Illustrator or InDesign or whatever, if you have type on a page, that needs to be 30 times the type height or less for optimum readability. Have a nice day, guys.